The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. This is Robert Chakowski, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. Today, we want to talk about a very important and timely topic, and our webinar is going to be focused on how chief executives like yourself maximize ROI from your marketing investments. So why is it timely? Why is this topic timely? Well, because of a couple reasons. First of all, if we truly are in a recession, which we technically are at this point in time, one of the challenges with marketing for your marketing programs, for other marketing programs at every company, is it's easy to have the budget cut. And so you want to prevent that because marketing is the cause and effect. Marketing is the cause. It's going to be the lifeline for sales. It's going to be the lifeline for revenue. And so the key there is you've got to be able to justify the spend. So the spend is very important. So we want to make sure that when we're thinking about the spend here, we want to make sure that you're in a position to really do a great job justifying that. So let's make sure that you can see the screen here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Perfect. So we're going to talk about that. And as with any of these webinars that we conduct every month, you'll find them very impactful, informative. The key is to make sure, jot down your questions. You've got an ability to ask questions throughout today's webinar, and make sure you do ask questions. We're here to answer questions. We're here to help you on your journey. And so write down the questions. There are some webinars that we do where we can't get to all the questions. And if that's the case, I'll make sure that we address them separately after the webinar. So we appreciate your involvement. We appreciate your attendance, and we appreciate your participation. Craig and I are going to be facilitating our discussion today. And 13 years ago, Craig and I founded On Demand Advisors, and we are a global revenue acceleration agency. What does that mean? It means that both of us have been operators of some very successful companies in Silicon Valley, myself as CEO and Craig as CMO. And as we built these successful companies, and we did that in a serial basis, we said, wouldn't it be great if we can determine the best practices in the industry for revenue growth and share that with all the chief executives out there? Provide that to them. And then we said, well, not only do you want to be able to share the best practices and the strategy, but we also want to do something that's innovative. We want to create revenue growth practices and innovations that you've never heard of. Things that's so innovative, you'd say, gee, we've got to do that. So for instance, one of the innovations we talk about is a sales-driven website, where you're actually conducting most of the sales process on the front end on your website, the digital transformation that you're doing for your customers and prospects. And so it's a fantastic way for you to do what Gartner says you need to do, which is the upfront education before they engage with the salesperson. So it's strategy, it's best practices, it's innovation. And the last thing I would talk about today that's important with every one of these webinars is transparency. So if you think about building a company, and I've been very fortunate building some great companies, you hire great people, you put in the processes, you put in the systems, you put in the best practices and so forth. One of the keys that you want, though, is transparency. So as we talk about a lot of these things around revenue growth and how to put in best practices, we want you as a chief executive to have transparency to that. It's different than hiring somebody and expecting them to do great things for you. Instead, what you want to do is both. You want to create winning systems that you understand how they work, regardless whether you came up through sales, marketing, engineering, finance, services, or another area. And you want to understand that as you're running these organizations with transparency to see how it's done, how it's put together, how it's assembled, and how it's optimized. So those are some of the goals that we have at On Demand Advisors I'd like to share with everybody today. One of the things that we'll refer to time and time again is what we call our revenue acceleration system. It's the assembly of the best practices that we've been working on for 15 years around how do you create predictable revenue outcomes for your company? How do you do something in a capital efficient way? How do you ensure that you eliminate what we call mindless experimentation? How do you scale, whether you're a mid-sized company, a large company, or even a startup? And so this is the system because revenue creation is a connected process. Today, and in our next webinar next month, we're going to focus on the red area, which is marketing and marketing best practices. And today, of course, is about ROI. But we just wanted to share that with you that we've got a system. And one of the things that we do is we don't just create best practices. The mainstay for our company is help companies and clients like yourself implement them. So we put in what we call the build, operate, transfer approach. Build it, optimize it, and then transfer the knowledge of the DNA inside the company. And that's something we've been doing for many years and very successfully. Now let's talk about your company. For those of you that are joining us today on today's webinar, some of you are startups. So there's a life cycle we'll talk about for every company. Early stage companies, it's about capital efficiency. It's about putting in the right revenue growth best practices. And it's about putting in what Craig's going to talk about in a few moments about the foundation. Getting the right foundation is really important so that you can scale and grow. If you are coming to us today and you are a chief executive at a mid-stage company, then you're saying, well, gee, Bob, this is great. We have a number of these things in place, but we've got to figure out how to scale. We've got to figure out how to do this in a very capital efficient way, but it's all about growth. Maybe we're here in North America and we need to go to Europe and Asia Pac. Maybe we're in one market and we need to get into 3 other markets. So the trajectory that you need is different. Now, if you worked at large companies like I have, like at Oracle, or if you worked at SAP or some of these large companies, what's interesting is these revenue growth practices are just as meaningful. And the reason they are is because big companies tend to check a lot of boxes. They say that they're doing all these things, but necessarily they're not doing them well. The other thing about big companies and mid-stage companies is you're not just a mid-stage company. If you decide to get into a new area, let's say you decide to go after financial services as a vertical, or if you decide to bring a new service to market, you're essentially a startup within a mid-stage company. So think about the initiatives that you have at your company. Some are mature, some are early stage, some are in the middle. And what we're going to be talking about today in terms of ROI and the system we talked about earlier applies to all different stages of your company. So let's get to the meat of what we're talking about today. And we're talking about marketing ROI. One of our clients is a $35 million software company in California. And when we met Jeff, who's the CEO, he sat down with Craig and I, and he says, "Hey guys," he says, "I have revenue about $35 million, so we're a reasonably sized company, but we spend a lot of money on marketing, and a lot of money that we spend on different things. But the way I look at it is that we're spending money on stuff." He says, "I don't understand how that stuff is converting into sales and revenue. So please help me figure that out. Please help me figure out how to do that. Where's the beef? Where's the ROI?" And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We helped Jeff do that and master that process, and we'll help you do the same too. So we got a couple polls, and love to get your participation because it's highly directive in terms of what we talk about today. So I'd like to launch the first one if I could, and I'd like to have everybody participate. So the first question is, when you think about marketing ROI, and I'll just launch this, how do you measure your marketing ROI today? So do you not measure it today? In other words, you've got marketing programs, campaigns, and personnel, and you're really just focusing on because you know it's necessary to do. Do you do it at a company level? Do you look at your total marketing spend in investments versus what the outcome may be in sales? Do you do it at a program level, really figuring out where the ROI is at? Or do you try to do it at a very specific campaign level and say, is this campaign generating results that we're looking for? So go ahead and if you could weigh in on that. Appreciate the feedback. All feedback is great. And we'll keep the poll open for just a little bit longer. And we'll take time and we'll share the results to everybody on the webinar today, because I think it's great. It's great to know your peers, great to know what other folks are doing in terms of thinking about marketing ROI. It's a very important topic, often a topic that doesn't get enough airtime. Okay. So if you got your sales is collecting responses, everybody's in here. Thank you very much. Let me close this off and share the results. Okay, 25% of you stated that you don't measure your marketing ROI today. That's great to understand. Another 25% stated that you do that at the company level, kind of at a gross level, to seeing what do you spend in marketing and what are you getting on the back end as far as sales. Another 13% stated that you do that at the program level. And then finally, 38% state that you do it at the campaign level. So it's good to know in terms of where you think about ROI today. So thank you for that. And we'll have another poll later on in our webinar. Okay, what I'd like to do then is Craig's just been tremendous in terms of his background, as we talked about earlier, in terms of being a serial CMO, working with hundreds of companies to help them in terms of their marketing programs, strategically achieve their objectives, tactically to put in the programs, and strategically to make sure that they get the results. Before that, he also was a branding expert, a creative director, working with large companies like Google, like Levi Strauss, like Nike, Disney. So a lot of companies. So he has a tremendous background. And so, Craig, as we're thinking about today, and we're starting through these 5-part discussion with the attendees today, can you share your ideas about creating marketing goals and objectives? And that's really the starting block for most companies.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bob. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. So I've been, as Bob pointed out, I've been a CEO or CMO multiple times, internal to companies, so at public companies and private companies. And in that capacity, I had to be responsible for the operational metrics. And when Bob and I started this company 14 years ago, we translated that into not being just another marketing agency, but being a revenue agency. And part of that goal was to really work with the companies at strategic levels. And so with Bob in his CEO background and my CMO background, we have helped hundreds of companies, and we can come in and I've advised at the CMO level when companies don't have it or they just want to augment that experience. So from that, from those hundreds of experience points, what I've realized is many things that you can measure. There's many things you can put your focus on, and it can be quite maddening because marketing itself is a discipline that's very broad. So what I like to do is start, and when anybody asks this question, is start with what are the most salient points, and then let's focus on that, and then let's get deeper after. So we're putting it here in these 3 buckets, and I want to talk about that just a little bit through an example. We have a company that we have been working with for 3 years, Technical Toolboxes, and Technical Toolboxes is a software company serving the midstream oil and gas industry. And we focus on software companies, but it really, the type of software companies, it really runs the entire gamut. But in this example, the first one, when we first got engaged, we want to focus on these 3 areas. And when we first got engaged, Technical Toolboxes was a brand that was adrift, and it was focused on just delivering something like 200 plus calculations, and I'll say that word, to the engineering space. Where we pivoted their brand was being the premier software solution that offered engineering performance suites in their respective space. So our goal with the brand was to create something that was unique. Our goal was to elevate the brand and make it a differentiated position relative to all the competitors out there. And we did that within those 3 years. The next point that we wanted to do was focus on, from a strategic standpoint, how do we grow the company from a percentage basis and have that predictable revenue growth rather than having the lumpy revenue growth. And Bob talked about it earlier in an earlier slide, and we can get into it with you individually, but it's all about the revenue engineering model, the science behind generating revenue, and there is a method. There is a very rigorous method that you should apply, and that was another thing we applied. And then the last thing is, how do we enable the sales team at Technical Toolboxes for success? And then that had multiple subparts. And so one and two of generating enough quality and quantity of leads, and that's going to something we're going to talk about, putting together a portfolio of programs, of lead channels, as well as individual campaigns, so we can begin monitoring that. And then the third one he listed here about sales enablement. Sales enablement is deeply tied into creating sales tools and enabling the sales team for success, as well as what we have is what we deploy for our clients is called a Revenue Performance Center, which allows all the sales tools to be housed in one place and disseminated and absorbed for quick usage. And the last thing that we helped them focus on was the partner enablement. And in their case, they had a strategic industry partner, and we helped them focus their relationship with the PRCI in the best way, so that they can look at how is that turning into revenue? How do we measure ROI from that relationship? So there's different ways, and we're going to talk about this on our next slides, but there's different ways in which ROI should be looked at. There's things that roll up, things that are kept siloed, and we'll talk about that, Bob.
That's good, Craig. So you're doing a great job with Technical Toolboxes, bringing that to life, these areas to life for the audience, because these are all strategic topics that are relevant and important. But talking about clients that we work with, the many clients that we work with, and giving them the example brings it to life. What we'd like to talk about next for everybody is really, how much do you invest in marketing? So that's always a question that Craig and I get all the time, which is, how do you invest? Where do you invest? What would be the right ways to think about investments? And so that's the next piece of our webinar, is really talking about where's the investment and making the strategic choices. So Craig, walk us through that if you could.
Absolutely. So when we think about that marketing spend, and it literally is one of the very first questions that we get. How much do I spend on marketing? Well, it's a simple question for which has a simple answer and a complex partner. And the way to look at it is to break it into some major buckets. And so there's a base spend that every organization is going to have to deploy, whether you're a fresh startup, to whether you're a maturing company, to whether you're a large organization with multiple sites across the planet. There is a base spend regarding infrastructure and website and key resources, human resources. Those pieces, we should keep those separate when we talk about the investment. So I'm gonna keep that in one bucket. And I am generalizing right now. Of course, it's a very complex topic, but right now I'm just trying to get the big bites down. The next piece I'd like to separate out is the branding spend and the strategic messaging and the positioning to keep that differentiation growing and continuing a long tail of value that is going to deliver that competitive differentiation in the long term. And the last bucket I want to talk about is the programmatic spend. This is where we're talking about the content development, the demand generation. We're going to put in the sales tools. We're going to put all the things that are associated with the programs that we will spend money on, and that is going to be ultimately, if you're a small company and you ramp up, you're going to be spending 80–85% of your money in that bottom one. And so one of the dangers, and I'll talk about this later, is many small companies, smallish companies, will come in and say, well, we need a CMO, we need a VP of marketing, we need somebody who knows what they're doing we need to hire that person. I'd say that's probably wrong, because you're going to be spending a lot of money on a certain person, and you could be betting wrong. And so one of the things we do is we talk about how do we come in on-demand advisors, how do we come in and help you get everything, your infrastructure put up to speed with respect to your base spend, hiring the right people at the right time, and putting in your branding spend, putting in your programmatic spend over a course of time so that you can really optimize that dollar that you're actually putting out there so that you can get the best return on your investment. And we're going to talk more about that.
And to that point, Craig, sometimes when we work with some of the smaller companies, if they spend a lot of money and resources, it leaves them no money for programs and campaigns and for that. So one of the things that you've been very good at doing is saying, well, we do need to have the right resources, but the key is making sure they are the right resources, because as you said, marketing can be such a broad area. So it's great to really look at that strategically and figure out what's the right thing to do at the right stage.
Absolutely, Bob. And so unfortunately, there's a lot of people in marketing who I've come across who are a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's not a lot of depth behind that. And unfortunately, they can sell themselves in an interview and be hired, and the depth behind what is being hired is actually not a lot there. And then unfortunately puts the company back months, if not potentially even a year.
The other model that, Craig, you and I have been very successful working with is where there is an existing team, and we go in and we complement that team. Because, it's like when Ray White came to us from ICUC, he said, I've got some good marketing people already in place. The challenge I have is I've got to grow revenue by 67% year over year, and I'm not going to get there under my current trajectory. So can you guys supplement what we do today, which is what we did, and then work with the internal team. So there's a number of different models that can work really well for companies depending upon what they need.
That's correct.
Let's look at a couple ways to think about the marketing spend here, Craig. So when you're thinking about the spend and what that is, walk through, if you could, a couple of these different topics.
Sure, absolutely, Bob. And so there's certainly a rule of thumb that can be applied. As you see on the slide here, we talk about 5 to 10% of revenue. So let's just walk, but unfortunately, that's not some universal thing you can apply. And as an example is, so let's just say you're talking about a company with $20 million in revenue. Okay, with 10% of that is $2 million. That's probably right. Now, however, that's not going to necessarily scale as you go higher in revenue to 100 million or 200 million, et cetera. That necessarily should be adjusted accordingly. But if you go down and let's just say you're a pure startup and say, well, I have no revenue. So what is a percentage of nothing? Well, and here's where you're going to have to apply, and we're going to talk about this. You're going to have to apply a different type of approach, where you're going to look at what your projection is based on the revenue engineering model that we have. But you're going to wait based on that. But you're also going to be looking at a different weighting of the different areas, whether how much you're investing in the base at the beginning, the base infrastructure versus the program. So one of the things we talk about with smaller companies is, and even it applies to mid-sized companies, is you're going to spend more to get to fix your base at the beginning before you start spending money on your programs. And the big trap that a lot of companies get into is they just start saying, well, I need activity. I need to send some programs out. I need to send some campaigns out. And well, that's fine, but that's where you're going to spend a lot of money. And so if the rest of your infrastructure is not fully working or not even there, you're going to be spending a lot more money, and it's worth waiting a few months, if not a couple of quarters, to get things correctly oriented so that you can best take advantage of the model you're building as well as the money you're spending.
Good. So, Craig, that's good as far as looking at a couple of different ways to look at how much should I spend in marketing. What we'd like to get to next, I think, would be your thought process around how do we measure ROI in marketing? And so walk us through these different models if you could.
Sure. And what we're showing here are four different formulas, and they can get more complex than this. But for the sake of space on the page, we wanted to show you probably the four most asked about, the four we talk about the most often, and this can actually get more complex, the formulas themselves. So when we look at, and I want to talk about each one of these because there's a value to each one, and measuring and monitoring each one. And some of these roll up to others and some don't. Some stand alone as silos. And so when we talk about programmatic ROI, it's the one I focus on the most, because there's a base infrastructure you have. There's people and elements, and when we talk about, if anybody's in accounting or who understands financials, we talk about a full cost of goods. I mean, then when you talk about marketing ROI, that's really what that gets down to. This is the fully loaded cost, but the programmatic ROI is really a subset of that. Now, the programmatic ROI is measuring, all right, if I'm spending 85% of my dollars, my valuable dollars, and that's a lot, on these programs, how do I measure the success of those aside from the base? So it's not that you don't want to measure your full marketing ROI, you do, but you want to separate it and part of a roll up to your full marketing ROI. Now the third one on the list here, the product launch ROI, is a unique one. How do you measure the success of a unique program? And this could be looked at as part of the programmatic ROI is really a subset of that is the campaigns ROI. And you should be measuring that as well. But most companies can't get to that granularity, at least not out of the offshoot. So you start here, then you go to the campaign ROIs. But the product launch ROI is really a separate animal, because now you've got other things involved in what's the revenue that's being generated by the product. So what goes into that? What are the dollars that goes into that product launch? Such as the different campaigns, but beyond that, the expanded the product launch itself. So you could make certain decisions as to how you want to measure that ROI, and that would go into the formula. But there are certain ways you should measure it, and it is a very valuable thing to roll up to your full marketing ROI. The last thing I want to talk about is a sales-driven website, and that's something that not a lot of companies focus on. And most websites are not sales-driven. Most websites are marketing-driven, and that is unfortunate, but it is what it is. So we have a different approach on On-Demand Advisors, where we build a sales-driven website. It has a very specific methodology, has a very specific function, has a very specific process. And in building a sales-driven website, you want to measure the ROI of that. So, and there is a specific way to do that. And again, we have a separate webinar and a whole separate discussion and program around our sales-driven website initiative, and we can certainly talk to you offline about that. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it is one of those unique things that should be measured, but it should be pulled out from that programmatic ROI. Okay.
That's good. Could you, Craig, maybe walk everybody through a couple examples at this time?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. Can we go to thank you. So we're going to show you two examples of this in the sense that this is, of course, a high-level summary. There's a lot of detail that goes behind this, but we're going to show you two examples of two current customers. And this first one here, first I want to get you oriented to what you're seeing here. There are three columns. One's the marketing spend for the programs. The second column is the opportunity value that's created. Third column is the closed dollars for revenue. All right. Then from a row perspective, we're looking at 2021, we're looking at 2022, and then we're looking at a roll up at the very bottom of 21 to 22. Pretty straightforward. Now, where I want to talk about are these percentages. So one of the things a lot of people measure are just if you are measuring programmatic ROI or even marketing, you may be just looking at the final column to the right, the percentage. What I would argue is you should be looking at your ROI at the opportunity level too. So as you're spending your money, you're spending your program dollars, what's that return you're getting in generating that opportunity funnel? And then ultimately, how does that convert over to your sales funnel? So in particular, I want to call out, and I want to point out an example here. You'll notice 2021 ROI for opportunity value was 390%. And then you'll look at 2022 ROI was 925%. So recognizing in 2021 there was a problem in the conversion of leads to opportunities, that was a focus on how to improve it. So not only was it improved, it was blown out of water, where it went from 390% to 925% from an opportunity value. And so, but then the next challenge was, as you'll see on this spreadsheet, and I'm pointing out issues that percolate up once you look at metrics like this. Now we're seeing things qualify in, but we're not seeing we're actually seeing a reduction in the ROI for sales. So as everything, at the very bottom, you have 604%, 222%, but 2022, you'll notice 209%. That's actually a reduction from our 232%. So things are going the wrong way. And so I want to look at the next example and show you where things are going the right way. These are good metrics. You need to have these metrics so you can interrogate and then improve things. I mean, you gotta look. So the next one is interesting. It's a different company. So you can see the spend, the programmatic spend in the left column, and then you can see the ROI for the opportunity at 401%, and the ROI for opportunities in 2022 being 433%. So a nice gradual increase. You'll also notice on the close percentage that you're at 243% in 2021, and then that increases at 270%. So though that is a healthy improvement rather than something going wrong in the pipeline that needs further interrogation. So, and of course, if you want to ask us questions later offline about how to measure this, then we certainly can get into the back end details.
Good. And then just to close off on this, Craig, from a dollar perspective, what you're saying basically, if you look at, let's say, the very bottom down here, you're saying, I put $1 into marketing spend, programmatic spend, and I got $4 out in terms of opportunities, and I got $2.6 out in terms of revenue.
That is exactly right. And that's the way to look at these percentages. So looking at it from that, $1 in produced $4 in opportunity, and then $2.60 in closed business.
That's good. So Craig, maybe you can help companies think a little bit about, that are on our webinar today, about the allocation of their spend.
Sure, absolutely. So I alluded to this earlier, and this graph here helps explain it. So I broke it into 3 buckets for everybody. So the bottom blue, this is just over the beginning of an engagement, and companies retooling things. And there's a certain constant with the headcount. Maybe it fluctuates up a little bit, maybe it fluctuates down, but for the most part, it's not moving much. Same thing with the brand. You're going to have a certain brand spend that you're building out there for helping with your differentiation against your competitors. And then I talked earlier about always an increase at the very beginning about the base infrastructure and putting in the right measurements, putting in the right core elements of marketing. You'll notice that yellow portion is significantly higher, and then it tapers off to a constant. But then that is completely in contrast to our programs, which should start off small and then grow over time. And that will be ultimately the lion's share of your marketing budget. Now, the problem is most companies that come and talk to us, they have this inverted. They think, I need to start spending money to generate leads and opportunities. And they start overspending in their programs when the rest of the infrastructure is not in place. It's a big mistake, flat out. It's a big mistake. And if you're doing it, I'm saying it's a big mistake.
Let's talk a little bit about thinking about what's the right mix. So you talk about programmatic spend. How do you think about the right mix of programs and campaigns?
Sure. So once your infrastructure is in place, this is a basic flow chart that we put together that helps guide, the core infrastructure. In this case, is just showing Salesforce. You could be using HubSpot inside. You could use a number of other systems, but this is just showing Salesforce and Pardot. So the key here, when you're thinking about your deployment, regardless of whether it's going to be through any number of lead channels, is having the right infrastructure in place, and then starting off with one or two programs, getting those functional, then adding another program, then adding another program, then adding another program. But the key part, and what I want to underscore here, is the continual measurement. And rather than just starting off and overwhelming a system, add that in slowly, like you would you're cooking at the stove. You need to do things gradually, and you need to start ramping up. And if you're a more mature company, you've got a number of things. You may want to start ramping down a few things, and then start adding things back into your mix after you ensure that your infrastructure is fully operational. And there is no one size fits all, since companies' where they are in their life cycle is very, very different from one another. But the core elements are still the same, and how you add in programs, what programs, of course, themselves are going to be indicative of the industry you're in and who you're trying to serve. So there is no perfect, to say, well, here's the perfect channel, here's the perfect set of lead channels. Well, that itself is going to vary. The message itself is going to dramatically vary. So there's many factors that go into it, but the core infrastructure is the same.
So, Craig, the final area we wanted to talk about, as far as this whole process of measuring ROI for marketing, is really the evaluation and assessment of the mix, and perhaps you can kind of walk us through the way we look at different personas or different titles, different people, and what's important to them as they're thinking about this.
Sure, absolutely. So what we're looking at now, we're going to look at a number of different personas, and as we talked about measurement, we ultimately, at the end of the day, as executives, we want to see what are the trends, what's the trend in regards to a percentage. 200% ROI last year was 190%. It's going the right direction, but we still need to look at the details. And if you are managing somebody, or if you're delegating this, you need to look at the individual areas. And this particular one is looking at the marketing dashboard. So what are the key things you should be looking at, measuring, and continually reporting on? And so there are some core things. We look at lead by status and lead by industry. These are all just really important things so we can look at monitor the health of the marketing funnel. And then the next one here, this is going to fall into the marketing operations. So we're going to be looking at the marketing operations opportunity dashboard, and we're measuring, what matters. So while there's a lot of things you could look at, we need to start looking at, in order to understand the health of the opportunity dashboard, we need to start looking at opportunity amount by rep, opportunity amount by lead source, and that's an important one. We talk about which programs to invest and divest from. Opportunity amount by product, if you have multiple products. Sometimes companies only have one product, sometimes companies have 20 products. It is important to understand how we're generating those opportunities based on that. And then we'll look about the fourth bullet down here, planned opportunity, because that ties directly back into our revenue engineering. So what was the plan? So were we planning 1,100 opportunities for the year, and we're only at 600 in November? Well, that's a big problem. So we need to have those red flags percolate up much sooner. So by having your goal and monitoring this on a continual basis, you'll get that. Let's look at the last one here, or one of the last ones. This is your sales dashboard. So now we can look at, well, how did this different sales reps? Sometimes you'll have, and this potentially could be an issue with a sales team. There could be, everything's fine from the lead generation to the opportunity generation, and maybe potentially there's an issue with the different reps, and that needs to be interrogated. So there's different value points that you can be in once you have that high-level ROI, and again, always goes back to ROI, high-level ROI, how do you dive down into one step lower so that you can attempt to influence it in areas that you perceive to be broken or maybe potentially not working as well as it should? And let's look at our last one, the CEO, of course. The CEO dashboard, you know, every CEO should come in saying, well, how many new leads are coming in? How many new opportunities are coming in? What's my planned sales amount? Now, of course, different size companies are going to care about different things, and this is a very high level flyover. But at a core level, there are certain things that should be continually measured, even if this ends up being the CMO dashboard. That's the CMO logging into this, and that's fine. But the point that I want to walk away with is, yes, you have your ROI, but in order to get that ROI and push that ROI forward, there are important dimensions that you need to continually have that finger on the pulse.
Okay, thanks, Craig. So Craig covered for everybody today 5 areas of looking at your marketing spend, your marketing ROI. What we'd like to do in the next area is 2 things. One is we'd like to do a poll, and then we'd like to open it up for questions that you may have. So please jot down those questions, make sure that we've got those questions. And while we're doing that, we'd love to get your opinion on this next poll. And that's in process here. So we'd like to get your opinion in terms of takeaway from today's webinar. What did you find valuable? So in terms of your major takeaway, share with us what your thoughts are. And by the way, you can select all that apply on this question. So did you get what you needed to in terms of determining what constitutes ROI from your perspective? Did you think about maybe the next thing would be to create some ROI dashboards? As we showed you, for different titles, different personas, you may have a dashboard for the VP of Marketing, CMO. You may have a dashboard for the VP of Sales. You may have a dashboard for the CEO. You may even have a dashboard for the board in terms of showing them the actual conversions and the ROI that they're receiving. Is it educating or evaluating your programmatic spend? Is it evaluating your website? Or is it really enabling you to tell a better marketing ROI story? So appreciate your feedback on this, and we'll keep this open for just a little bit longer and then share the results with everybody today. Okay. Let's go ahead and let me go ahead and close this off. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We really appreciate that. Okay, here's the results. 55% of you stated that one of your major takeaways is determining what constitutes ROI, which is great. 27% stated that it's creating these dashboards that Craig was showing you so that you can really truly represent the right filter, the right outlook as far as ROI to the right audience. 45% stated it's evaluating your programmatic spend. 27% stated it's evaluating your website. And then 55% stated it's enabling you to tell a better marketing ROI story. So that's fantastic feedback. What we'd like to do at this time is open it up for questions for Craig and I. And so please go ahead and post the questions. We're here to address them with you today. Okay, and we've got quite a few questions, which is very good. Cynthia, you had a question, just will we receive a copy of the webinar after the webinar? And the answer is yes. We'll be happy to do that. We always record the webinars because we realize that in many cases you may want to share that with your colleagues afterwards. And so that's always going to be available in terms of looking at that. This one is from Greg. This question says, do you include marketing staff salaries into the ROI? Craig, did you want to handle that one? The question is, do you include that?
I was on mute. I apologize. I was on mute. So the answer is yes. On one of the ROI calculations, the one that's the full marketing spend ROI. So yes, that's the one you would include the salaries. So, but do measure the other ones independently so that you can interrogate, your different percentages.
Okay, good. Here's another question. The question is, I know you mentioned another webinar about a sales-driven website, but can you lead us to one of these sites so that we can see what it looks like? That'd be great. So one of those sites is, Craig mentioned one of our customers, Technical Toolboxes. You could go to their website. And this is going to be something we're going to have an upcoming webinar later in toward the end of the year. A sales-driven website is one of the true innovations that we created at On-Demand Advisors. And what we're doing there is we're taking the buyer's journey, and we're taking it by solution, we're taking it by persona, and we're guiding you through the buyer's journey. The reason why that's so significant is because your website should do all the upfront education, preference setting, and selling and positioning that needs to be done for your solutions or services. So I look at websites. A lot of websites are good at informational websites. They may even be elegant in terms of their visual appeal. What they don't do, though, is they don't take you through the buyer's journey. And so that's really important. All that should be done digitally, and you should have the way to self-select. But we're going to cover that in detail also. But thank you for your question. Here's another question, which is, where do I start when it comes to ROI?
Sure. So when it comes to starting measuring your ROI, well, number one, you need to have a budget. You need to be you need to be spending to your budget and have your budget compartmentalized as to how you're going to measure against it. So as at least in the major categories that I talked about. Then that's on one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is what are you measuring it against? So if we're talking about programs, you're going to be measuring the different program spend, and that has to be tracked through whatever your system is, whether it's HubSpot, whether it's Pardot, Salesforce, those different systems, so you can begin looking at results. And that would be the place to start. It's obviously a little more complex, but there is definitely a certain method to do that.
Good. That's fantastic. Here's another question, and this one is from Martha. Martha says, how many opportunities do I need? How do I calculate that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer that. So the answer to that one is it's based on the revenue. So it's a calculation on what's the revenue goal for the company. Let's just and we have a certain method we walk through, but what's the revenue goal for the company? And what's the price of the service or solution you're selling on an instance basis, and whether that's a one-off or whether that's a recurring revenue. There's different ways of looking at that. But then what you're going to need to make an assessment is how many sales you need. All right, and that's one way. And then the step back, and it goes to your core question, is how many opportunities? Well, there's going to be a percentage of conversion from that in the opportunity funnel to sale. And so it's going to be working backwards through the revenue engineering methodology that we have in order to get the answer to that.
Well, that's good, Craig. This is another question. This is from Sherry. Sherry asked, how do I measure the lead source effectiveness?
The lead source effectiveness is going to be tied into an earlier answer. I'll expand on it a little bit. So each lead source, and we think about the lead channels at that point is what I like to call them. So each lead channel is going to have a certain spend. And so and you should be tracking in order to measure the effectiveness. You need to measure it against whatever your goals are. So the effectiveness is ultimately a number that you're saying is effective. Effective against what? So if I say that I'm going to have as a goal a conversion of lead to opportunity of 10%, and I'm only hitting 5%, well, that's not effective. So now I got to interrogate my different lead channels to say, well, which one is actually failing me? And so that I can improve it. And that could be potentially even cutting out a potential dud of a lead channel.
That's good. That's great. Thank you, Craig, for answering those questions. I'd like to talk about some next steps for everybody that's joining us today. Here's a couple of things that we would offer to you to consider. If you'd like to really figure out how to deliver on your performance acceleration plan, in some of the areas that we talked about today. Let's just start with one area, programmatic spend. One of the things that we like to do is offer what we call a sprint or quick program for 2 weeks to actually sit down with you and look at what you're doing today in terms of programmatic spend and really help look at where you're spending the money, how you can more effectively achieve the goals that you have in terms of this area, and maybe what you're missing that needs to be added to the mix. So what Craig and I do is we're very good at sitting down with you, looking at what is the lead volume that you're going to need today and tomorrow. What are your goals? Start applying our revenue engineering model to calculate that. And then really understand what's in place today. What are the programs that you have, the campaigns that you've been using? What are the systems and assets that you have available to you? And what content and calls to action are you using today? And by doing so, we can then sit down and say, here's some recommendations. Here's the definitive action plan that you could put in place. And we try to be very cost effective in terms of providing you with this service and this advice. So you're going to get some tremendously talented people to work with you. But over the 2-week period of time, we're going to deliver the results, the recommendations, the action plan. And for those of you that are on the webinar today, instead of $2,500, we're going to do that for $19.99. So if you're interested, we'll give you our contact information at the end of the webinar. Just let us know your interest. And that's the first one. There's a second one, which is looking at your website. So most of you have looked at your website and you're saying, well, there's probably areas for improvement. One of the biggest areas that we look at measuring is what's your visitor to prospect conversion rate. You may get a lot of traffic. You may get 5,000 people that come to your website, let's say every month. The question is, how many of those people are being converted into prospects today? And so you start looking at what's the goal that you have for your sales-driven website, and then start, if you think about transforming or evolving, what would it take to move from an informational website to truly a sales-driven website that actually could help you accelerate your sales process by, let's say, 33%, which is typically what we see. And so if you're interested in that and having a blueprint for success in this area, we'll do the same thing with it, which is the 2-week sprint for you. And myself and Craig and some other team members will be involved in terms of working up the plan with you and helping you put that in place. So 2 options that we have. In addition, through the remainder of the year, we're going to be conducting these informative webinars as we do. Today, it was about creating the demand that you need so that you can, or I should say the next one is about creating the demand you're going to need for 2023. Now, people may say, well, that's a little bit early because we're not in 2023 yet. But one of the things that we love to think about is going into 4th quarter, putting in the programs you're going to need so that come January 1st, you're hitting the ground running. You're ready to go. You're scaling. You've got the demand generation engine in place that you need. In October, we're going to talk about achieving championship sales performance. So you can register for that. And we're going to have all these webinars posted to our website. And what we see with a lot of companies is that they've got sales teams, but they've got the ABCs. And so they're trying to figure out how to really have consistent performance. In November, we're going to talk about the sales-driven website and how it's going to accelerate your sales process and convert visitors into prospects. And then in December, we're going to talk about mastering the science behind extraordinary revenue growth, because there is science here in terms of how to do this. And it includes both the science and the art. So those are some really wonderful opportunities upcoming for everybody here. To contact Craig and I, here's our email addresses. Here's the office phone number. Here's our website. Please feel free at any time to reach out to us. Let us know how we can assist you, questions that we can ask, and best practices that we can share with you. So what I'd like to do is say on behalf of myself, Craig, and our entire On-Demand Advisors team, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for learning more about marketing ROI and how it can be applied to your company. We hope that you found this webinar extraordinary in terms of benefit and the building blocks that you have for your marketing organization. Have a great day, everyone.